Hello and welcome to the Focus in Week Polity and Governance, where we are going to take up all the relevant articles, segregate them into prelims and mains, and discuss along with PYQs and mapping them with the syllabus. As you can see on the screen, there are 3 news articles that we have identified which are important mainly from the perspective of prelims examination. So you can see that private member bill has been in news because there were so many private member bills and resolution, but except for one in Rajya Sabha, none of them were allowed to be tabled on the parliament, which directly gets connected with the declining parliamentary productivity, because other trends have also emerged that 18th Lok Sabha is also looks like not going to be much productive. Right to property has again come into the news because of the Supreme Court judgment, where it has said that right to property is a human right. Third is the removal of the vice president. Because of some of the actions taken by vice president, opposition threatened that they will bring the resolution for the removal of the vice president, which also also happens to be the chairman of the Council of States. Then, because of the demise of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, ex-Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, we are going to analyze his life mainly from economic and political angle, which is relevant from the perspective of GS paper 2. Municipal bond have been in news because 3 and 4 newspapers certainly have started focusing on the lackluster or lack of enthusiasm, lackluster performance of the bonds or the debt instruments issued by the municipal bond, and why the investors are not showing interest. And you can understand that because of their own internal revenue mobilization capacity is so low, for the coming foreseeable future, the only viable source of funding or financing the urban development and growth story is largely going to be through debt instrument known as municipal bonds. So let's now quickly discuss the prelims topics, because there is no analysis involved. Let's quickly go through them. As you can see in the heading, private member bills get short shrift in both houses of the parliament. Private member bills and resolutions are the only avenue available for parliamentary individuals to express their opinion without the diktat of the political party. Because it's their own venture, the political party generally do not issue the whip. You can see that in 2017 there was a question, consider the following statements with reference to the Parliament of India. A private member's bill is the bill presented by the member of parliament who is not elected but only nominated by the president. Recently, a private member's bill has been passed in the Parliament of India for the first time in its history. Obviously, you know what is the correct answer, but look at this graph. Private member's bill, you can see that there were 47 listed for introduction. How many of them were introduced in Lok Sabha? 0. In Rajya Sabha, 68 private member bill were listed for introduction, 0 were introduced and 0 were discussed. When it comes to resolution, there were 6 that were listed, 0 ultimately discussed. There are 7 that were listed, only 1 in Council of State Rajya Sabha was discussed. So you can see that also reflects the declining contribution of individual members of parliament into the overall functioning of the parliament, which ranges from holding the executive accountable to contributions in lawmaking, debate, discourse, discussion, and ensuring a thriving democratic values in the politics. Now, what is a private member bill? I'll give you a brief introduction and then we will go and see the slides for the prelims section. So you know that with respect to most of the bills, the constitution does not limit the introduction of the bill by any particular person. So for example, when the constitution says that ordinary bill can be tabled in either house of the parliament, and without specifying whether there is a need for the introduction by the president, what basically constitution wants to say, anyone and everyone, be it a part of the government or beyond or outside the government, has the capability to table that bill. That becomes a private member bill. On the other hand, there are certain specific requirements before tabling certain bill. For example, let's say if you want to politically reorganize our country, utilizing the power given under Article 2 and 3, basically under Article 3, let's say if you want to do that, Article 3 says that only President shall recommend the consideration of such a bill, which means President works on the aid of advice of Council of Minister, which means such bill cannot be a private member bill, because President is not going to act on aid and advice of private member bill on a private member. Similarly, when let's say there is a money bill, or a finance bill, anything or everything that has to do with appropriation of money out of consolidated fund of India, custody of the contingency fund of India, something to do with taxation matters. In all those matters, if you read the provisions from Article 110 until Article 118, it clearly says that President's recommendation is mandatory, and that's when they become only the government bill, or the executive becomes the only authority that can table that particular legislation. So that's when you know that what is the difference, basic core difference between a private member bill and a government bill. It is introduced in the parliament by a minister. Public bill, it is introduced by any member of the parliament other than minister. It reflects the priorities of the government, it reflects the stand of the opposition party on public matters, but it can also be tabled by any of the members of the party in power as well. It has a greater chance of being approved because it has a support, already has a support of majority. It is the government agenda. It has a lesser chance to be approved by parliament because individual MPs generally do not have the capability. Its rejection from the house amounts to the expression of wants of parliamentary confidence. If the government tables a bill, but government is unable to get that bill passed from the house of the people, obviously immediately it will show the government probably has lost the majority. Its rejection means nothing. Its introduction in the house requires 7 days notice. Its introduction in the house requires 1 month's notice. So government can put a very short notice and table a bill. Private members require long time. It is drafted by the concerned department. So for example, changing of a name of a state, Home Ministry will draft that particular bill, whereas it is drafted and it is the responsibility of the individual member. So you can see that this much knowledge is sufficient for us to answer any question when it comes to the prelims examination. Next is right to property. Is a human right. Supreme Court says in BMRC land acquisition case, right to property is a human right. The discussion we will not do with respect to human rights. We will pick up human rights some other time because we want to contain the discussion in 1 hour, but you know what are natural rights, what are legal rights, what are human rights, fundamental rights. There has been one question: what is the position of a right to property in India 2021? Is it a legal right available to citizens only, legal right available to any person, fundamental right available to citizens only, neither fundamental right nor legal? Obviously we know when the constitution was passed, right to property was a part of the fundamental right under Article 19(1)(f), correct? But just after the promulgation of the constitution, land reform agenda across the state started facing problem because they tended to violate the fundamental right, because land reform is all about putting a ceiling on the property, which is fundamental right, taking away property above ceiling, which is a violation of the fundamental right. And that's when Nehru government brought first constitutional amendment to put Article 31A and 31B, which basically created a lot of abridgment or restriction on the exercise of Article 19(1)(f). And if you trace the evolution of right to property, it strongly correlates it as the core of the understanding of the basic structure. Because it was through 31B that 9th schedule was provided. If a law is put under 9th schedule, it gets a blanket immunity from the judicial review, and this was the main contention under the 17th Constitutional Amendment Act, which was challenged in Sajjan Singh case. And so the increasingly trouble between executive and judiciary, Sajjan Singh then admitted under Golaknath judgment says Parliament does not have the power to take away any or either of the fundamental right. It is undone by 24th Constitutional Amendment, 25th Constitutional Amendment, which is overruled by Keshavananda Bharati case, which is then again undone by 42nd Constitutional Amendment, which is then struck down by Minerva Mills case. And so ultimately it was decided through the 44th Constitutional Amendment, because Minerva Mills judgment had already said that right to property under no stretch of imagination is the part of the basic structure. It does not fits the essence of the constitution, which needs protection. And so if the parliament goes ahead and deletes it, we are not going to bother the parliament. And that's when 44th Constitutional Amendment deletes, and that's when you go to the Article 19 in the Bare Act, you will see 1A, B, C, D, E, and then you will see F deleted, and then you will see G. So F was moved out of the part 3 and was put into Article 300A. Persons not to be deprived of property save by authority of law. No person shall be deprived of his property save authority by the law. As you can see, number 1, it is available to all persons, not restricted to just citizens. And the deprivation of property can come from law, which means either the parliament or the state legislature through a validly enacted law can deprive people of their liberty. Can deprive them people of their property, private property. Now the question is, what is the difference that we see once the right to property was moved from part 3 to Article 300A? Earlier it was a fundamental right, which meant that governed by the provisions of Article 13, no law could have taken the property earlier. But now you can see the protection is available only against the executive action, whereas by changing the law, the normal amendment to a legislation can deprive people of the right to property. Apart from that, you can see that anything that is a violation of FR becomes the case to be originally heard by the Supreme Court under Article 32's jurisdiction. Whereas you can see that now if you feel violated as far as your legal right to property is concerned, you cannot directly knock on the doors of the Supreme Court. So you can see that all of this has been carried here. Constitution 44th Amendment Act 1978, no person shall be deprived. The word law means validated law. What is the difference it made? It can be regulated, curtailed, abridged, modified without constitutional amendment. It protects private property against executive action. The aggrieved person cannot directly move the Supreme Court. Let's now move on to the last discussion under prelim section, and then we will start the main section, is the removal of vice president. Now here, I do not just want to talk about removal. I want to highlight few things which people tend to ignore when they go through the constitution, which is the position of the vice president. Why is the position of vice president created? Before that, let's have a look at the question. PYQ 2013, the chairman and deputy chairman of the Rajya Sabha are not the members of that house, while the nominated members of the two houses of the parliament have no voting right in the presidential election. They have the right to vote in election of the vice president. So you can see the basic factual information is tested very often at the stage of prelims examination. That was the idea to take up this news, and also the idea as to why you should go through these. So whenever you read appointment, removal, or anything to do with any constitutional body, make it a point that you immediately revise it from the Baer Act or from the Lakshmikant. So obviously, why we have a vice president is because we have a president. Now you might laugh at this statement, but because the constitution says there shall be a president of India, you always need a president, but you cannot guarantee people's lives. And just for the same reason, America has a couple of president and vice president always. The main task of the vice president in US is to always be ready as a replacement, so that there is no void as the head of the state and as the head of the government, which is a combination in the form of president. In case of India, we have a different situation, but still we always want head of the state, the ceremonial head of the state. There should be some person always, and so that's why largely the purpose to create the position of the vice president, because if there is a vacancy suddenly for some unforeseen, unfortunate incident or the reason, vice president immediately goes and takes over the work, right? That is the main purpose. Apart from that, vice president has also been given another, although he is or she is not the member of the Council of States, that person has been made the chairperson. So he happens to be the only person heading a particular assembly, but not being the member of that particular assembly, correct? So there is a particular process of election of vice president. There is a particular process of removal, not the impeachment. The word impeachment is only used with respect to the president in our case, in case of the Constitution of India. So so what are the qualifications? 35 years of age, citizen of India. You should be qualified enough to become a member of Rajya Sabha. At the same time, you should not hold any office of profit, which is common with the president. What is the process of removal? You will be removed from a resolution. You will be removed by a resolution of all the then members of Rajya Sabha. That goes to Lok Sabha, and Lok Sabha can agree with a simple majority that we want the removal. But what are the functions as a chairman? As a chairman, quite similar powers as compared to speaker. As any presiding officer, they have the power to interpret the provision of the constitution, the rules and application of the rules. So all the details are here that you can see. It is important for us to remember that these have been the vice presidents of our country, you can see a strong trend. Vice President number 1, Vice President number 2 becomes the President. Then let us know in the comment section how many presidents India has seen that later on became the President, and since when have we seen the break in this particular tradition. So all the details that are required that will enable you to mark the right answer in prelims examination have been listed here. Let's now move on to the next article that is going to be with respect to a very prominent news that we have done or we have seen over the period of last 10 days. So I hope it is clear by now as to why we have taken this particular topic. Ex-Prime Minister Manmohan Singh has passed away, and there are plethora of articles, editorials paying tribute, analyzing his term as a Prime Minister, analyzing his term as a Finance Minister. And so what we have done is that we have collected all the editorials being published in various newspapers, and we are here to present a holistic analysis of the overall career of Mr. Manmohan Singh, and not just his career as a Prime Minister, because more often than not we have this tendency of seeing this person as just the Prime Minister who headed the Prime Minister's office from 2005 until 2014 for the two term of 5 years. But how many of us know that he was the Prime Minister when India brought liberalization, privatization, globalization? Maybe some of us know, many of us know that. But how many of us know that even before Prime Minister Manmohan Singh was a Finance Minister in 1991, he was the head of the Planning Commission, Vice Chairman of the Planning Commission? Probably not a lot of us know about that. But even before he was the head of Planning Commission, he was the Governor of RBI. So he has served as the Governor of RBI as well. But even before he was the Governor of RBI, he was the Chief Economic Advisor to Prime Minister Indira Gandhi from 1972 to 1974. So you can see such a career in economics first, then policy making, and then in active politics. So it ranges from core economist to a politician, but at the heart, ultimately, an economist will always remain an economist. So you can see when a person of such stature passes away, obviously there must be a lot that he must have contributed in India that we can see overtly. There are a lot of nuances that we need to remember. Obviously it forms the part of our GS paper 2 syllabus, because GS paper 2 syllabus expects us to keep a track of executive. And when the chief of the government or the executive itself passes away, who has very recently headed the Indian government for 10 years, it becomes important for us from the point of view of both prelims as well as for mains. So from the point of view of prelims, it is important for us to know what are the positions that he has headed, when was he Prime Minister, and from the point of view of mains, it becomes important for us to analyze his overall contribution to India's economics, politics and society. Alright, so because he has served such a vast career ranging from economics and policy making, it is important for us to segregate such policies into the positive outcomes, and as well as to be able to see what were definitely objectively some of the misses of, or the demerits, or what were some of the blots on the career of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. When it comes obviously to the achievement, there is no denying the fact that number one achievement will have to go to economy, because he was first and foremost an economist. So we do not have much information as to his career as a governor, and it is not important because it is now more than 40 years. But because when he was the finance minister, when he became finance minister, the crisis that Indian economy faced was such an imminent danger. It was such a crucial phase of Indian economy that some radical, bold decision had to be taken. And who was the person who conceptualized these bold decisions? Finance Minister Manmohan Singh under the Prime Ministership of P.V. Narasimha Rao in 1991. Why the economic situation was so troublesome at that point of time is another discussion in itself. But if I give you just two figures, you will realize how difficult situation was in 1990 and 1991. Number one, you know that whenever we have to import, RBI has to have foreign exchange reserve sufficient to pay for them. In 1991, there was a time where India only had $1 billion as a reserve which was only sufficient to pay for the next 14 days of import, beyond which India would run out of the foreign exchange reserve. At the same time, this was also the juncture when the fiscal deficit of the central government was around 8.5% of the GDP. Now, if you can imagine and you can compare since last 10 years, what has been the average level of fiscal deficit? What is the expected level of fiscal deficit according to the FRBM Act? And so such a high level of fiscal deficit is obviously unsustainable, and the reason attributed for such a nadir of Indian economy was attributed to the socialist pattern of Indian economy, initiated and perpetuated by Mr. Nehru and taken to another height by his daughter Indira Gandhi, under which almost everything was monopolized by the state sector, and state was sitting at the commanding heights of the economy, so almost everything was under the state regulation or under the direct control of the state, and the connection of India with the global economy was extremely restricted. Even when it was allowed, it was highly regulated, and so it was felt that it's the time for India to unshackle itself, cut its ties with the socialism and transition into the domain of capitalism to be market driven. And that bold reform was initiated by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, at that point of time Finance Minister Manmohan Singh. And so that's when you see liberalization, privatization and globalization. India ushered in LPG era in 1991 when he was the chief architect of the economic reforms. You can see three words: liberalize, which means to open up; privatize means to reduce the involvement of the government in the business, and ultimately allow the India to increasingly intermingle with the global economy, denoted by the word globalization. So when it comes to liberalization, it is not very difficult for us to think as to in what ways the liberalization would be allowed. It is basically about reducing the number of regulations that the government had put on the private enterprise. So earlier there was a list only under which private businesses were allowed. Manmohan Singh was the person who said, rather than maintaining a list under which private entrepreneurs should be allowed, we should maintain a small list where we can say private businesses are not allowed, which means anything that is not listed, you can open up a private company, start your business, register it, and just follow the basic norms you can carry out. That is the deregulation of the industrial sector. Obviously, because he had been the governor of the RBI, he understood the role of the RBI less from the regulator point of view, but more from the facilitator point of view. And so he is the person under whom RBI's role transitioned into facilitator. He is the person who allowed the entry of the private banking facilities into India. Before it, all the banking was under the government control, or all the banks were the nationalized banks. This was the first time when private banking licenses were issued and the new private bank came into existence. So, I mean, again, it is a discussion on its own. When it comes to privatization, the government initiated the policy to privatize or disinvest itself from a lot of public sector undertakings. When it comes to globalization, how do you increase your interconnectedness with the global economy? Is first and foremost, you allow the trade and investment. How do you allow investment? By opening up India's economy to foreign investment. So for the first time openly, government articulated its policy to allow the foreign investments up to various levels. So you can see that even now that process is continuing, where either most of the sectors have now 100% automatic route FDI. There are only certain sectors in which there are certain limitations for automatic mode, but most of the sectors now have been open. Even the defense sector has now become open for foreign direct investment into our country. As far as trade is concerned, trades in goods and services was extremely regulated because there was a limit, obviously, on the current account convertibility and capital account convertibility. India decided to give up the current account convertibility as to how much of the transaction can be immediately converted if it is with respect to settling off the trade in goods and services. But India still continues to maintain some checks on capital account convertibility, but current account convertibility was let go. Obviously, India decided to reduce a lot of import duties or tariff barriers, slowly and gradually committed itself to the WTO norms. And when it comes to the quota restrictions were completely removed. Before 1991, to be able to import a lot of the commodities, there was a limit on the number of commodities that can be imported after a license has been issued by the government. So you can see that after 1991, India started ushering in the market-driven economy from socialism to capitalism, and that's when you can see that from $1 billion of forex reserve, we reached $600 billion of forex reserve after when his term came to an end. Slowly and gradually we saw reduction in the fiscal deficit, and after that obviously we created laws for the control of the government borrowings, but nonetheless these are the scenarios, special contribution in economy. But when we analyze the life of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, we forget his political astuteness, how skewed as a politician he was. Because if you go back and analyze the term when he was really holding a largely political position as a prime minister, he was an accidental prime minister. He was not supposed to become a prime minister. UPA surprisingly got a majority, was able to bring along a coalition where they could cross the halfway mark. In that case, Sonia Gandhi was supposed to become a prime minister, but she, for various reasons, did not find it fit enough to become prime minister, and so she gave the name of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, and he became the prime minister. Now, as a prime minister who comes from Rajya Sabha, it is increasingly difficult. It is very, very difficult for a person who is not from the popular house, who is not from the house of the people, to be able to manage the coalition of such large number of parties. But Prime Minister Manmohan Singh not only managed it well, we will see very soon as to how he was able to take bold decisions despite managing so many different parties and Congress being the majority holder, not able to secure majority on its own. If you go to the time period of 2004-5 until 2013-14, you see India ushering in the framework of right-based entitlement. One of the very first initiatives that the UPA government headed by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh took was the initiative, for example, to bring the right-based claims on the information known as right to information. It had already been interpreted by judiciary as a fundamental right under Article 19, but there was no legal provision to get that right enforced against the government and the public information. It was the Right to Information Act which gave us the procedure, to ask for information and get it enforced on various government departments and all other authorities which are public in nature, that it mandated and made it obligatory for them through a proper infrastructure creation, through a proper procedural creation. It became very easy for any ordinary citizen to seek information from the government, right to information. This was the first one. At the same time, there are various radical legal reforms. For example, you must have heard about MG Narega. Right-based entitlement to work, right to work, became your legal right because the government of Manmohan Singh passed this law. When it came to right to education, it already existed in Article 21 as a form of constitutional amendment, but was it really accessible to all of us in the lack of any kind of law? It was obviously not available because there was no law to give effect to the provision, and so it was the Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's government which brought Right to Education Act. At the same time, we have already talked about right to property being a legal right under Article 300A. If you want to really create a legal entitlement, the abridgment of a legal right and how that shall be proceeded became applicable in the form of Land Acquisition Act passed by Manmohan Singh government, which made it mandatory for the government to reimburse at a market rate and more than a market rate minimum value of the land in case it has to be utilized for public utility purposes. At the same time, if you have heard about National Rural Health Mission, a mission to revamp the rural health infrastructure in the entire country in the form of centrally sponsored scheme, it became a law. It became a welfare scheme, a flagship welfare scheme under the prime ministership of Manmohan Singh. So you can see, when it comes to the overall policy and governance, there are so many reforms and so many legal entitlements that we became entitled to enjoy under his prime ministership. When it comes to foreign policy, his achievements cannot be ignored nonetheless. For example, in foreign policy, as we'll be talking about, generally you must have heard about the difficulties that India faced in trying to access civilian nuclear technology, because we were not a signatory to Non-Proliferation Treaty (NPT), because of which we were not allowed by a group of people known as, group of countries known as nuclear supplier groups. And so America, for the first time, gave India the waiver through the Congress resolution. And as soon as India allowed access to IAEA, access to its civilian nuclear technology, all the apprehensions, so it was basically pursued by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh, to the extent that at one point of time it looked like that the communist parties which had supported the UPA government, which were the partners in the coalition UPA, they could withdraw and the government could fall. Manmohan Singh took that risk, and that's when unilaterally you can see he pulled India-USA relationship into an extremely positive direction. When it comes to China, for the first time, the map location that you read in geography, Nathula, became open after 4 decades. When it comes to Bangladesh, India and its neighborhood relation, it was the time that is the best time between India and Bangladesh relation. Obviously, because of a person who became prime minister in Bangladesh was obviously a well-wisher of India. She's right now in India as well, Sheikh Hasina. And because of the Indian government and Bangladesh increasingly close ties, Bangladesh had become a hub of anti-state, anti-India activists, insurgents, especially from Northeast. Head of all the terrorist and insurgent organizations working and operating in Northeast were having their training camps in Bangladesh. They recruited their people, trained them in Bangladesh, and they got a safe harbor within the territory of the Bangladesh. It was during the time of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh that Sheikh Hasina promised that we will get rid of all anti-India elements from our soil, and she did it and delivered it within 1 or 2 years. And you can see that was kind of that set or paved the way for future peace and prosperity in Northeast, and also provided access through various ways passing through Bangladesh waters and Bangladesh soil to be able to access Northeast, because until that point of time only chicken's neck could have been the only way to access Northeast. So these are some of the achievements, some of the, not all. It's impossible to cover it in 1 hour polity class. Obviously, however, you cannot deny that there are certain lurking issues while he was prime minister, because he was not the head of the Congress. He did not have the command of the Congress party. He did not control the organizational party, which was controlled by the Gandhi family, headed by Sonia Gandhi and Rahul Gandhi. He was considered as a weak prime minister. So while we can always say that these laws were passed during his time, it is questionable as to how far these laws were the intent of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh himself, or they were largely the intent of National Advisory Committee, which was an extra constitutional body created by Sonia Gandhi, who used to conceptualize all the draft, and allegations are that these drafts were passed through the Prime Minister, through the Parliament, rather than being ultimately the design of Manmohan Singh. He was weak, which got manifested in various other elements, especially the high level of corruption of his ministries, which led ultimately became one of the major reasons for the demise of UPA2, with respect to the 2G spectrum scam, coal scam, and various other minor scam, which need not be mentioned except for the fact that he was not able to control the functioning of each and every ministry, because each and every ministry was governed not by the Prime Minister's office. Prime Minister office was in fact bypassed while the formulation of legislations. because the coalition partner, they got the ministries in proportion to their contribution, and Prime Minister had no control, and that's why he's seen as a weak Prime Minister who had an extremely corrupt government. Is this clear to all of you? Let us know in the comment section if this is clear. Obviously, one of the dents on his term is inability to be able to take care of the internal security of the country. If you go back and see the terrorist attacks from 2004-5 until 2013-14, you will see such high rates of attack on Parliament. The biggest known is Mumbai attacks. So you can see multiple terrorist attack, and the failure of the investigating agencies and the failure of the intelligence agencies to be able to thwart these attacks on Indian soil is obviously one of the blots on his face. When it comes to economy, now you might think that we started with the discussion on economy and we are ending the discussion on economy, is because if you look at this cartoon, I hope this is visible to you. This is the thought process of Prime Minister Manmohan Singh when he initiated LPG reform, showing the dream that you saw this, and these are the tree of the currency that you will reap in future. But the LPG or the capitalism that we unleashed in India created such stark inequality in the society that the same person who was being convinced that he will reap the benefit is not able to see the benefits of LPG because it's beyond its reach, it's above the cloud, it cannot be perceived by that person. Increasing inequality, lack of inclusive growth is also, one can always argue, is also the outcome of the policies that were initiated by Prime Minister Manmohan Singh himself. And so you can see overall, but if it comes to the analysis, you just cannot focus upon either the good outcomes or the bad outcomes. Obviously, there are a lot of things to his credit. There are some misses also, which will be the case with every statesman and every head of the country. So you can see that we have given you the notes. You can go through them later on. And let's now move on to the next article, which I hope you can see on the screen. Municipal bond. Why municipal corporations struggle for revenues mirrors India's faltering urban development agenda. It is a part of your GS paper 2. Devolution of powers and finances up to local levels and challenges therein. For that, we have designed a question to which you can write an answer and post it in the comment section. Discuss the role of municipal bonds in financing urban infrastructure in India. What are the key challenges? And as to why we have taken up this news is because in our country, although the central government is nudging, regulator SEBI is nudging more and more urban local governments to issue their municipal bonds to raise money from the market, but investors are not showing much of an interest in investing in these kinds of bonds. The kind of interest that they show when it is about treasury bond, when it is about corporate bonds of profit-making public sector or maybe private companies, the same kind of interest is not there. It's missing when it comes to the municipal bond floated by prominent cities like Pune, Indore and various other cities. So you can see several cities including Pune, Bhopal and Ghaziabad have been issuing municipal bonds to raise money from investors to finance their civic projects. But despite Indian market regulators push, there are few takers. And now it is becoming a problematic situation because the kind of financing scheme that has been conceptualized by the Constitution of India for urban, local and rural local government in our country, which is basically 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment, it creates huge reliance for these urban and rural governments on the central as well as the state governments. And that is a big problem when it comes to urban governance, because if you look at the overall urban areas which are notified as town areas, these are increasingly becoming populated because of extremely high rate of rural to urban migration. As of now, the figures are not clear, but 36 to 38% of people in India are living in urban areas, the areas where you have local governance by the name of municipal corporation, municipality. And so you can see that we are talking about around 40% of the people living just within the urban areas or within immediate surrounding of urban areas. So it is about direct service delivery and human development of the people who live in urban areas. And if you look at India's constitutional scheme, if you look at the items that are mentioned in the 12th schedule with respect to health, education, public infrastructure, urban roads, town planning, all these items are provided for ultimately to be served by the municipalities. So these are the urban areas. But it's just not about the population that they have. It is also about how urban area contribute massively to India's economic growth. Because the India's economic growth is service-led, 60% of the India's economy is contributed by the urban areas, because services, by their very basic existence, they have to exist in urban. It's very difficult to create service-led economy in rural areas because of the kind of value addition that they do and the kind of support infrastructure that they require. So the manufacturing can be done outside urban areas, but service-led economy has to be located within urban areas. So 60% of the contribution to India's economy and around 38% contribution to India's population comes from territories within our country, which are very small overall as proportion of the overall area, and which are governed right now by the urban local governance. Now, in order to be able to do justice with 38% population, and in order to be able to act as a driver of the growth for next 2-3 decades, obviously you need to keep up with the expectation. You need to match the pace of increasing population to increase your health, education budget. You need to increase the pace of urban public infrastructure creation, water supply, sewage, public transport, so that you do not become a roadblock into India's growth story. And so the problem is that if you want to finance that, what are the mechanisms that you have? So there are various mechanisms that have been conceptualized in the Indian constitutional scheme. Because I'm not going into introducing 73rd and 74th Constitutional Amendment Part 99A of the Indian Constitution, let's for the time being ignore the constitutional provision, because here is the summary. So for example, the overall revenues that flow into urban local body, municipality or municipal corporation, can be divided into two parts, internal and external. Internal means what are the sources of revenues that they themselves can rely and invoke or be dependent upon. For example, the constitution envisages tax as well as non-tax revenues. Just like central government has the power to levy tax on list 1, state governments have the power, or they are the right competent authorities to invoke taxes on the list 2. The urban local bodies are conceptualized that they can have some tax and some non-tax powers. Obviously, some of them have been taken away under the purview of GST, but even after that, they still have a lot of residual taxation powers, which obviously you can see in the form of land tax, in the form of property tax, that they can invoke even now. Apart from non-tax, something that is not a tax, something that is a rent or a user fee, which means that the lot of facilities that urban local governments provide, water supply, they charge for it. Correct. In a lot of places, they also provide other facilities. For example, they run schools, they can charge fees for it, minimum fees. So if you provide a good to the people and services to the people, you can charge for it, and that becomes the fee component of the overall internal, on which you are not dependent on any external agency. However, there are external sources also. For example, there is a road that was constructed by the state government, a small urban road, on which the tax or the toll is collected by the state, but then it is assigned to the local urban body. So all such kinds of tolls and duties or fees collected by the state, but that is assigned, not appropriated by the state government, is known as the assigned revenue. At the same time, if you look at the provisions of Article 280, Finance Commission is mandated to talk about the devolution of the finances to the urban, local and rural, basically to the local governments. So there is a component that directly flows from the central government, there is a component that directly flows from the state government, and then obviously any other private and public institution can donate to the urban and rural local bodies. The problem is, however, that if you look at the overall internal and external. Let's say an urban body gets 1 rupee every year from the combination. The overall assessment of the entire urban governance in our country shows that when it comes to the internal or their own source revenue generating capacity, it is less than 1%, whereas 99% of the revenues that flow into, on an average, we are not talking about a particular urban governance, we are not talking about Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation, we are talking about in general, taking together, on an average, out of 1 rupee, only 1 paisa is that they are able to generate on their own, but they are perpetually dependent on others, and that's the 99% of the revenues that come, which means that their own revenue generation capacity is dismally low. And that is a fundamental problem with local governments, because the power is exercised so close to the people that any action that goes in the direction of increasing the fee or increasing the tax will have immediate consequences, because the people who have elected you, they live in your neighborhood, which is not the case, for example, with finance minister, the union finance minister, correct? Because there the power is exercised so close that we do not have direct connect with her, and so that's why it is easier for the union government to increase and deploy more and more number of taxes, so which is already a problem with the entirety of the local governments in the world. But in India it is stark because it is less than 1%. Apart from that, the overall 1 rupee is dismally low to fulfill the obligation that is conceptualized under the Constitution of India, which means that not only your own revenue generating capacity is low, the overall funds that flow from state and central government taken together, 1 rupee is insufficient, which means that $1.3 trillion is required over a period of next 10 years to fulfill the obligations of the growth projections of India's economy as well as urbanization. Overall, the funds that will flow will be less than 1/3 in next 10 years. So which means that the rest of the infrastructure will be created from some other resource. And what that other resource is was ultimately shown the way by the 14th Finance Commission, that now coming times the municipal corporations should issue debt instruments, should go to the market and borrow money, which basically now became famous as municipal bonds, or also known as muni bonds. These are the debt instruments which the municipal, urban, local bodies can issue in the market that is regulated by SEBI, and through that they can guarantee some minimum return to the takers of the bond, and it is a win-win situation. And that was the idea which actually quite brought high level of enthusiasm among the urban local managers, that now we have a resource in which our dependency on central and state government will be decoupled, because who doesn't want to have a government bond? But as you will see, the interest is very low. But before that, let's see in what ways a municipal bond can be floated. So you can see that SEBI, being the regulator of on non-central and non-state government bond, which is in that case it is with the RBI, SEBI regulates all other kinds of debt instruments. The SEBI has come up with a regulation in 2015 as to how to float the municipal bonds, and in which they have provided for 2 kinds of bonds to be explicitly mentioned while issuance of the bond. One is the revenue bond. So if a municipal corporation comes up with a bond of 100 CR, that they want 100 crore rupees to be raised from the market, and the purpose of that is to lay down the water, drinking water pipeline, clean water pipeline, and they are going to charge a fee for that, and from that particular fee the interest will be paid back. They are called revenue bonds, which have clearly well articulated source of revenue for the repayment of the interest of the bond. Whereas SEBI regulation says that then there are general obligations bond. On the other hand, a particular urban local government can say that we want to use it for various purposes, but we promise you to pay it certainly, but as of now the use is not clear. It is going to be miscellaneous. This much is the amount we want to use for the next 5 years, and so this is a bond, and that is called general obligation bond, where the source of revenue for the payment of the interest is not clear. In that particular case, SEBI regulates that 4 steps have to be met clearly before any municipal body can bring out its debt instrument. Number 1 is that you should have an escrow account having funds to service the debt. Then you should have an interest payment account to pay interest payment from the first year 1/10 every month. Sinking account, which means account to pay principal amount 10% annually, and then debt service reserve account, which means 2 years of interest payment as a reserve of IPA interest payment account. So unless and until an urban local government fulfills these 4 requirements by setting up these 4 accounts, they cannot go to the market to seek borrowing. They cannot borrow the funds from the market. Now, there was some level of initial enthusiasm when some of the prominent urban local government came up with their debt instruments. But following them, central government also became very excited, and the central government came up with Amrut scheme. The notes have all the details about it, where they financially incentivize the urban governance, the local governments to go in the market and borrow, and the central government would contribute to such borrowing on its own. And that was a big incentivization scheme. But slowly and gradually, after the 10 years of Amrut scheme, it is clear that you can say enthusiasm is just fizzled away, or maybe it never existed. We were just hyping up the overall bond scenario, and which is quite contrary to our experience when central government goes to the market. It's just a hotcake. It sells like a hotcake. Everyone loves a treasury bond, but no one seems to be loving a municipal bond. And what's the difference? And the difference lies here. Why people don't show interest into a municipal bond is because of financial challenges, institutional challenges, and governance related challenges. The reforms in all 3 elements, if not brought at the right time, you will never be in a situation to create a hype or create demand for the municipal bond. Number 1 challenge, financial challenge. We have seen because on their own they have very limited revenue base. I hope it is clear. On an average, less than 1% of the revenue of the urban local government flows on their own. They have the limited mobilization capacity. And so, as an investor who wants to purchase a municipal bond, you would always be skeptical. What if the next finance commission reduces the grants to the local body? Then your revenues and your income would stop. The municipal body will not be able to pay it back, because they are not utilizing their tax and their own non-tax fee revenue sources. That's the problem. So limited revenue base is the number 1 problem, because they have a high level of dependence on grants. Institutional challenges include no guarantees. When the government goes to the market, the union government goes to the market, it has a guarantee of the Consolidated Fund of India. In case of a default, you know what is the collateral, and that can never run out of money. But when a municipal government, urban local government goes to the market to borrow money, they do not have the Consolidated Fund of Mumbai. There is no such fund. There is only Consolidated Fund of India and Consolidated Fund of all the states. And so because there is no sovereign account like that, there is no guarantee in that behalf. Of course, it is an observation of both the 14th as well as the 15th Finance Commission that obviously the states have not devolved a lot of taxation powers to the urban local government, but even if they have devolved it, the financial management of the local bodies is so bad that it literally takes the maximum amount of time for the Finance Commission, and in most cases they say that we were not able to scrutinize the majority of the state's local body finances simply because they were managed in such a bad manner. Now, because they are managed in such a bad manner, the problem that it creates is that as an investor, you know there is no guarantee. So the other way is that you directly communicate it to the urban body that if you want my money, get yourself accredited or evaluated from a credit rating agency. So you must have heard about the credit rating agency putting India into this category, B, A category, A, B category, A. So there are different 3-4 prominent ones, like Fitch is a rating agency. They analyze and evaluate the instrument, financial instrument, as to what is the creditworthiness of whether this agency will be able to pay you back the loan or not. Now, that credit agency also needs to look into the finances of last at least 10 years to be able to project next 10 years. That's when the debt instrument has been issued for. Now, in the absence of such audited accounts, the problem is that municipal bonds and municipal bodies are not able to get themselves audited, and they are not able to get themselves rated by the respected audit rating agencies. And so, apart from that, we know that because the finances and the functionaries that are devolved or delegated to the local level is so low, that there are lurking question on their capability to be able to complete projects within time. And because they will not be able to, because they do not have powers to do it, in what capacity they expect to complete the project, get the revenue and pay back to the investor. Apart from that, you can see that multi-level approval requirement, because most of the urban local government institutions, urban local governance, it is subjected under check of the central government. A lot of the departments of the state government and their activities overlap with the functioning of the urban government. These are the perpetuating problems, the problems that already exist as far as local government is concerned, they mar the overall viability of a municipal bond. So, for example, when you say that you want to float the example that we took, water supply facility. Now, there is already a water supply department of the state government. And so you can see that you need to take approval from that government. So there are multiple levels of approvals that are required, because they still are not the autonomous level of governance in our country the way union government is, and to a large extent state government acts autonomously in a lot of spheres. There are some issues, but beyond this particular discussion. So you can see that unless and until we carry out the long desired reform of funds, functions and functionaries together, probably municipal bonds will not become viable. Does that make sense? All right. So let's now go to the next news article, and now I want you on yourself to guess as to why. And the topic directly deals with GS Paper 2 syllabus. Parliament and state legislature structure, functioning, conduct of business, powers, privileges and issues arising out of these. And the performance of the parliament, to say the least, has been dismal in last many decades, but especially the session that concluded laid any doubt to the rest whether there can be any enhancement as far as the performance of the parliament is concerned, now that you have some reduced majority of BJP. So you might give way to a lot of parliament's power to be exercised on the floor. Why is it important is that you can see there have been two direct questions dealing with the parliament in the past. 2013, to what extent, in your opinion, in your view, the parliament is able to ensure accountability of the executive in India? Second question, individual parliamentarians' role as the national lawmaker on decline, which in turn has adversely impacted the quality of debates and their outcome. Discuss 2019. Parliamentary productivity. The ability of the parliament to function is crucial to functioning of India's parliamentary system. We know that under parliamentary system, executive is chosen or picked from the parliament, and executive indeed becomes accountable or responsible to the house of the people. And so one of the main functions of the India's parliament is to hold the executive accountable. But that is not the only function. If you look at the overall function of the parliament in our country, parliament is responsible for, obviously, we know that it is the primary agency, not the only, although, to make laws, lawmaking, then obviously holding the executive accountable. Obviously, then you have raising matters which are of public concern. As a representative, we expect that, and for that purpose we have 0 hour. So main purpose of question hour is to hold executive accountable. The main purpose of 0 hour is to act as a representative agency to be able to represent the diversity of our rich country, and obviously to be able to cultivate the leadership for the future political generation. Now, how do we know that there is a decline in the parliament function? How do we know that? Parliament is not able to fulfill its role as a lawmaker body, its role as its capacity to hold the executive accountable, because we have statistics. If you look at the diagrams, at the graphs on your screen, I will make it very clear if they are not clear in this particular format. You can see first and foremost a declining trend in every data that I have here to show you guys. There is a decline in everything except days to election of the deputy speaker, which itself is a dent on the parliament. Okay, so what is this about? Parliament has been sitting for lesser days, passing fewer bills. So you can see that the yellow color is the number of days on which Lok Sabha has sat in a particular session, and the gray or the white color is the Rajya Sabha, and you can see both of them have declined. Let's not talk about the absolute number. You can see that the latest one has sat less than almost half of what it was sitting in the first and the second parliament. Does that make sense? Then you go to this particular graph, discussion on budget in Lok Sabha declining. The time that is spent on discussion on vote on demands, which is very, very crucial. That is one of the ways, because money, as a money bill can only be tabled in Lok Sabha, House of the People, and only House of the People has the power to approve or disapprove any such demand. And obviously, clearly they are not taking care of that demand. We have not, let me just look at the heading. Yeah, so this is about the bills that are sent to parliamentary committees, and you can see 14th, 15th, and then stark reduction in 16th and 7th. Very few number of bills being sent to the parliamentary committees for their scrutiny. And obviously you can see that when it comes to number of adjournment motion, if this is the number 5, this is the number 10, on an average 5, then 3, then 2, and then just for the formality's sake, there have been one no confidence motion in the entire term of the House of the People in last 3 and 4 Lok Sabha terms. So when it comes to the private member bills, which is also something that we have discussed in the initial first discussion with respect to the prelims topic, you can see that private member bills, there were 47 that were tabled, listed for introduction. How many were listed actually? How many of the private member bills were given the leave of the House is absolutely zero. And when it comes to Lok Sabha, how many private member resolution were allowed to be tabled? There were 6 that asked for it. There was none that were allowed to table in Lok Sabha. When it comes to Rajya Sabha, there is only 1. And so you can see a stark reduction in the parliamentary productivity. So the data makes it very clear that there is an extremely stark decline in the parliamentary productivity. As to the question, what explains this kind of a trend? There are multiple reasons for it. In order for the parliament to be able to function properly, people should have interest in the parliament, and the members of parliament should have some power to exercise their discretionary power. The trend that we are seeing globally is that overall, in general, the parliaments are losing their own power. Assemblies are in decline globally. And why assemblies are in decline with respect to their powers is something that is a common trend that is acceptable globally. Assemblies are declined because more and more number of countries have the party system which has increasingly become organized. Once the party system becomes organized, there is a strong discipline in the party. Because there is a strong discipline in the party, whatever is order that is issued from the party headquarters has to be followed as a command. And once that happens, the location of the power shifts from the parliament to the party headquarters. In fact, India has constitutionalized the organized party system by anti-defection law, which has transitioned the power from parliament to the party headquarters, because if party headquarters decide what is going to be to happen in a particular legislation or legislative idea, why would people show interest? And that's when you see the decline of parliamentary function in their ability to hold the executive accountable, because if party headquarters says that 30 MPs are going to support the government, they will support irrespective of their personal conscience, their own conscience. Also, parliament and assemblies are declined globally is because there is an increment in the power of the executive globally. The executive has grown globally because of the widening of the state, because a liberal state which was only expected to protect your life, liberty, has transitioned into welfare state. Now the modern state is responsible to take care of not just to protect your life, liberty, but it is also protecting your right to, for example, in Indian case, it is also entitling you with work, it is entitling you with minimum guarantees of education. Right to education is your fundamental right. So it is ensuring that. It is also entitling you with minimum amount of food, National Food Security Act, minimum amount of grain. And you can see, if you can go on and on and on and see that modern state is a much bigger and a deeper state that is commanded by executive. And because it is commanded by the executive certainly becomes way more powerful in its ability to gather data, in its specialization on various aspects, in its overall workforce, human resource, and parliament does not have that. If there is one thing which could have allowed the parliament to match the capabilities of executive was committee system, but India created an extremely weak and inefficient committee system. Not only the members are not the permanent members, but they keep on revolving. There is no permanent support staff. There is no autonomy to the committees to hire and fire their own members, to create their own departments. They do not also have the autonomy to decide their own budget, which is unlike the case with the jurisdictions which have extremely powerful committees. And that's when the saying goes, powerful committees make powerful assemblies. Weak committees make weak assemblies. That is also one of the reasons as to why parliament is declining. Because in the absence of committee system, in the absence of a strong committee system, there is not much value that the committee might add. On top of that, we have a very peculiar situation of, speaker that obviously can never be assumed to be decoupled completely from the executive itself, because there is a way through which speaker can be removed from the office. Being speaker gives you an entitlement of a cabinet minister. It's a very dignified position. It comes at the 7th order of precedence, equivalent to Chief Justice of India. So in that capacity, once you become a speaker, you would always want to be a speaker. How can you be speaker always is only by the support of the majority party, because as soon as they want, they can remove you, because there is a removal procedure provided in the constitution, which is just contingent upon a kind of majority which is half the membership of the house. And so, because the speaker is hinged always to the executive's wishes, the application of the special powers of the speaker, the application of the special powers would include special powers like designating a bill as a money bill, allocating or issuing, admitting a particular resolution, admitting a particular private member bill or a private resolution, taking notice of a certain kind of resolution. All of that is an absolute power of the speaker. And if a speaker decides to use its power according to the wishes of the executive, obviously it means that the opposition in India, especially when it is a single party majority, will never be satisfied. And so the opposition will always feel unjust to be a part of the parliament. Apart from that, the peculiar system which India has created of election, which is first past the post, creates an extremely peculiar situation where it deprives the kind of minorities that are not regionally concentrated, of any kind of voice in the parliament. And the best example is Muslims. Overall, 14 to 15% of the population. Find out how many percentage of MPs are there in the parliament. Sikh, being regionally concentrated in Punjab, they are able to represent themselves. Distribute the same Sikh population across the country, you will have zero representation of Sikh as an ethnicity, as a religious community in the parliament. And similar is the case. So because we have decoded certain minimum representation to SC and ST community according to their proportion, beyond that, any kind of vulnerable section does not get an assured representation. And because it does not get so, their interests they are not articulated on the table. Their interests are ignored in representation. There is no representation of their interests. There is barely any concern for them, and the lawmaking process completely ignores them. So you can see that there are various reasons. Obviously, you cannot deny the fact that the overall political culture is also on the decline, but these are the fundamental reasons. So I hope with this discussion you were able to better understand the issues that have appeared in last 1 or 2 weeks. We'll try to be regular in our attendance and put forward in focus weekly. Stay tuned.